I'm Ralph Engelman of Long Island University. Today is October 28th, 1999. I'm conducting an interview with Sidney Lumet in New York City. We'd like to begin by spending about 15 minutes to get some information about your early years and influences. First of all, what was your name at birth?
Same one, Sidney Lumet,
And where were you born?
Philadelphia.
And did you grow up there?
No, I had the good sense to leave when I was one. Came to New York. My parents moved to New York when I was one.
And your mother's name?
Eugenia.
And what did she do?
She, when I was a kid, my father had a radio show, Yiddish radio, Jewish radio, and she acted in that, but otherwise, that was her only work, her only professional work.
And your father's name?
Baruch, Baruch.
And what work did he do?
He was an actor in the Yiddish theater.
Now, at age 4 in 1928, you made your acting debut. How did this come about?
My father was doing a Jewish soap opera called the Brownsville Zeta, the Brownsville grandfather. That's Brownsville, Brooklyn, not Brownsville, Texas. And he wrote it and directed it and played two parts, five times a week, 5 across the board, 15-minute show. And he got $35 a week. So, which during the Depression was an enormous amount of money. And so he needed every member of the family to chip in to play any part so that the money wouldn't leave. And so my mother played a part, and he had a part for an infant. And for some reason, I could cry like a baby. I knew how used to amuse my parents enormously. And so he needed a baby crying and put me up on a chair, and away I went.
Was that on WEVD?
WEVD, which, as you know, stands for Eugene V. Des.
Certainly do. Now, did you continue to act? Did you take any acting lessons?
What happened was that the show was very successful. I still remember the sponsor was a man by the name of Dr. Julius Lunenfeld, a dentist who had an office on Orchard and Delancey Street in New York. And by the end of the 3 or 4 years that show was on, he had the entire second floor with 10 young dentists working under him. That's how successful the show was. So that what my father did was that the Yiddish theater was still, it wasn't in its glory days, but it was still quite a force on 2nd Avenue. There were about 12 theaters. And every holiday, he would, every Passover actually, he would write a play using the characters from the radio show. And he'd engage a theater, and we'd go in for a 2-week run. So because I was a character in the radio show, I therefore had to be a character in the theater. And from there, I started branching out into other jobs in the Yiddish theater.
Now, tell me something about the Depression, how the impact it had on your family.
Well, you never realize that anything is extraordinary when you're living through it. It's only later. But as I say, he was so grateful, as we all were, for $35 a week, for 5 shows a week, with all of us playing parts. And the only impact of poverty, and it was living in very close to poverty, that we were aware of, that I was aware of, was we would move once a year. The reason you moved was whenever you took another apartment, you'd get what was called a month's concession, get a month's free rent. You only paid 11 months out of the year. And so if your rent was $15 or $20 a month, and moving cost $10. You picked up $10, and it was worth picking up everything, moving once a year to get that 1 month's concession.
And during the 1930s, were you politically active at all?
No, I wasn't. I was terribly aware. There was a kind of cultural heritage among Jews that was basically socialist. A lot of it came from the Jews who had come over from Russia, where the involvement in the early socialist movements going back to the end of the 19th century, there were a lot of Jews involved. And that kind of basic mentality of justice, equality, taking care of one another. The number of Jewish fraternal organizations, for instance, were numerous and of various political denominations, but almost all of them to the left. It was only a question of more left or less left. There wasn't anything right-wing in any of it, or even centrist. And it would start largely with burial societies. The organization would have a plot of land in Queens, all of which still exists today. And by joining the Arbeiterring or Workmen's Circle or any of those organizations, you were assured of a burial plot. You also could take advantage of summer camp, because they almost all had summer camps. And so the sense of support for one another was just a big part of the cultural heritage. And that part of it, I didn't know it was politics, but that per se gave me a tremendous connection, in a way, with basically the left.
And were there any other political groups or organizations that you joined in this period?
No, and in none of this, obviously, because I was a kid, was I the one who joined. My father, I remember that there were two camps, two Jewish camps, Kinderland and Kinderwelt, which hated each other. One was a Zionist camp, one was a communist camp. I don't remember which one.
Kinderland was the communist camp.
Was that
Still exists,
Yeah,
by the way.
really. At any rate, they would all ultimately, and this surprised us, hire my father as dramatic counselor. 1 year at Kinderland, 1 year at Kinderwelt. And his fee would be that my sister and I could spend the summer there. The main reason was to get us out of the city. But that was the work was that hard, in the sense that you poured in that much effort in terms of keeping your family going.
I want to turn now to early influences on your work and your art. Were there actors, directors, films, radio programs that were important to you in that period?
Well, we're getting a little later now. We're getting into when I started working on Broadway, which was when I think I was 11, 1935.
Right.
And immediately there were enormous influences in the sense that I was working with major artists. In the Yiddish theater, as I say, the best days were over. It wasn't with Adler and Tomaszewski and the group of great actors. Morris Schwartz was a pale imitation of the great Yiddish actors. So there wasn't a tremendous cultural stimulation. I was doing dopey musicals in the Yiddish theater. But once I came to Broadway, the first play, Sidney Kingsley, who remained a lifelong friend, and I think one of the magnificent American playwrights. There was also a kind of rhythm to a career on Broadway then, in the sense that every year Sidney Kingsley wrote a play, Elmer Rice wrote a play, Sidney Howard wrote a play, Maxwell Anderson wrote a play. The workers in the theater dealt with it as craft. No sitting around waiting for inspiration or what have you. No fear. If you had a flop, you'd be back the next season with another play. And that sense of continuity, respect for work, and the meaning of work in these people's lives was just very clear to me at a very early age. It was I remember many years later when I was grown up, I had dinner with Moss Hart, and he asked me his son Christopher, who was extremely beautiful, and Christopher wanted to go into the theater as an actor, and Moss said, Sidney, Moss directed me when I was a kid actor. And he said, Sidney, what was it like for you? Is it something that you would recommend for Christopher? And I said, Moss, God, yes. First of all, you cannot be exposed to really creative experiences too early. I do believe that. There's nothing wrong with, what's so great about playing stickball? It's much better to be in my second play, which was directed by Max Reinhardt, with a script by Franz Werfel, with music by Kurt Weill, in which the assistant director was Felix von Mendelssohn III, a great-grandson of Mendelssohn, exposed to some of the greatest actors in that cast that existed in the theater. And I think it kept me off the streets. I think it was a very good way to grow up.
Would you want to take it a step further and try to define or articulate how the influence of that on your later work as a director of teleplays on television and films?
I think it the biggest single influence that it had on me was this faith in quantity, that we really don't know what the result is. I began on Broadway when I was 11. I enlisted in the Army when I was 17. In those 6 years or 7 years, I did 14 plays on Broadway. And that sense of, as an actor, this is a kid actor, and that sense of, you just do the work. You just do the work. It was very important to me. And it gives you the most terrific kind of respect without putting you in awe of anything. You're not in awe of anything. None of it is mysterious. None of it is, oh my goodness. It was very moving one day. Some years ago, my wife, whose background is very different from this, literally relatives who came over on the ship after the Mayflower, because the people who came over on the Mayflower are a little too lower class for that family. And she had never, of course, known anything about this kind of life that I had led. And Michael Jackson was in town. And there was this unbelievable party, don't ask me why, for him at the Museum of Natural History. And Michael called and said that he wanted me to come, and gave me all the secret passwords and things that could get us into the inner circle. And we arrived at about whatever the time was. We got brought into the back. There was Michael. We talked, about 30, 40 people standing around. I'd never seen press like that. I mean, it was unimaginable. There must have been 200-300 photographers all over the museum. And Brooke Shields was there too. And she and Michael were, I don't know whether they were together, but they were hanging out together that night. And finally somebody blew a whistle and everything quieted down and the doors were open and all the press were allowed in. And I mean, it was phenomenal, the burst. And Michael and Brooks just stood there and talked among themselves while these, I would guess, 6,000 flashbulbs must have gone off in those 11, 12 minutes. It was in madness. Michael over here, Brooke over here. And they would do it and they would keep right on talking. And when we left, my wife said to me, it's the first time I've ever understood something about you. It's like breathing. You just do it. She had been talking about watching me on set, or the number of movies I had done. She said, "You've been doing it so long, it's just a norm to you." She saw it in them. She saw the way Michael and Brooke, both of whom had been doing it since they were each that high, and that this was the way they lived. So that continual exposure to work, work, work is a great, great contribution. The biggest single artistic jolt. I was, of course, being in the theater then, I was a complete theater snob. All theater movies were just, that's where you went to make money. And oh, sure, Faulkner's out there writing something, and Scott Fitzgerald and so on, and they're picking up a check. They save their serious work for the novels, which, by the way, is true. And we took the same snobism on as far as the theater was concerned. That actors went out there to make money. They didn't go out there to do good work. This was patent nonsense, but at least that was the snobism that was involved. I got interested, and I don't remember how, in foreign movies. And there were more foreign movies playing in New York then than there are now. There were theaters devoted to Russian movies. There was a theater on 8th Avenue and 44th, I think, called the Cameo, which played nothing but Russian movies. 2 theaters played nothing but French movies. 1 theater played nothing. The Italian movies didn't come in until after World War II. But the foreign film distribution system was much healthier. And for some reason, I don't remember how, I saw a picture called Days of Wrath by a great Danish director, Carl Dreyer. And I remember my reaction was, I couldn't have been more than 14 or so. Wow. If this is what movies can be, these people are just being snobbish. Nothing on the stage I saw compared to what that movie was.
Were there other movies that made...
Another Carl Dreyer movie, his movie of Joan of Arc. A wonderful Russian movie. And I don't know whether this was post-war or pre-war. I'm almost sure it was pre-war, called Beethoven Concerto, about a contest for children in Russia, a violin contest in which the culminating piece was playing the Beethoven Concerto with the Moscow Symphony Orchestra. I don't know why I remember that movie, but I do.
So were American movies of less interest to you at the time?
Mm-hmm. They were, except for Jimmy Cagney. James Cagney was it. And I was so naive about movies. When we lived on the Lower East Side, we lived all over the city and in every borough. But I remember at a very early age going down 14th Street, which had about, 10, 12 movie houses on it, and seeing James Cagney in this, and then across the street, James Cagney in that. And I couldn't understand how he got from this theater to that theater in time for his performers.
Let me turn just to radio briefly. Was there any influence that radio really exerted on your consciousness, or comparable to what you've discussed in terms of film? And
possible. I wasn't even aware of it until today, until much later, which is that I remember so much of what I heard, the theme songs, and not just Uncle Don, Eddie Cantor's theme song, and what radio meant to us. My mother, who was a very distant person, I remember sitting, and she loved Eddie Cantor. And I remember sitting and listening to Eddie Cantor with her, and her laughing. And it was one of the few times I ever heard her really laugh. Also, just from a personal point of view, it saved our lives because around, again, financially, because once I started working in the theater, I began working in radio too. And as an actor, a lot of shows, March of Time, Let's Pretend, there was Theater Guild of the Air, which was a big, pretentious, dramatic show in which the director, now this was radio, the show took place at a theater, and, in every old theater, there was always a prompter's box, which is actually the prompter is standing below stage level, and just his head is above stage level, so he can prompt the actors. Well, they put on instead of the normal piece of metal that blocked the sight of him from the audience, they put on a glass bubble, and he was lit underneath with 2 purple spotlights because there'd be a live audience attending its shows, and he would cue a sound effect, and he would cue an actor, and he would deliberately put his hands up here because those are the only parts you could see. It was part of the whole pretentiousness of it. It was hilarious. I think that might have been Lux Radio Theater. I'm not sure.
And what about some of the CBS radio drama?
I did Big Sister, and the checks were sensational. If I remember correctly, you got $85 for a show, which was a lot of money in the 30s. $85. But by the way, you always did a repeat. We did not have tape, of course. So you would do the show, and then you'd come back 3 hours later, and you do what we call the repeat for the coast, for the show for the West Coast.
Now, let me turn to your education. Did you attend college?
No, I never did, because by the time I graduated I went to professional children's school. I graduated in, I guess it was 39, 39 or 40, and did I'm not sure whether it was a semester or a term. Yeah, it must have been 40. I did a semester at Columbia in the extension department because I was working and I didn't have time to. I wasn't going to quit work to just go to work on just for a college education, and then shortly after that I enlisted. So I really had just 1 year.
Tell me, very in a nutshell, your war experience.
The nutshell is hard, but nothing I particularly enjoyed talking about anyway. It was terrible. I enlisted because I was very involved with the war, and involved from a political point of view. Was very much for it, did not think one could be for it and stay out and wait to be drafted. So at 17, I went down to Philadelphia to try to enlist in the Navy, and I couldn't because of my eyes. 17 was too young for the Army. You couldn't enlist till you were 18. But the Army had a program. Radar was brand new then, brand new. And they would take you at 17, but not into the Army. You would still be a civilian, but for 6 months they would train you in radar. And at the end of the 6 months, you'd go into the Army as a radar repairman, into the Signal Corps. So I did that, and then went in, I believe, sometime in 1942.
And were you am I correct in that you were in the China, Burma, India theater?
For 2 years in CBI.
Now, you've been quoted as saying that some of your knowledge of sound derives from that period.
Well,
Explain that?
What I meant was that part of your radar training was in that 6-month period, we got a 3-year electronic course, the equivalent of a 3-year electronic course in college. And so that from there on in, not much that could happen electrically that confused me. I knew electronics as well as anybody could. I mean, at one point, I was teaching a specific radar circuit, and I think I was 18 years old, in the Philco radar laboratories in Philadelphia, to professors, guys who had their masters in many other sciences. But I knew that particular circuit at that time better than anyone in the world because it was brand new and we were specializing in it.
Now, was that knowledge relevant when you later did work in television?
Well, sure, because when the audio man would when he had an oscilloscope there, I knew what it was about. I knew what a cathode ray tube was. I'd been working with cathode ray tubes and radar. I knew what the horizontal did, what the vertical did. I knew what all the triggering mechanisms were. So I'd had a good electronic education.
When you were in the CBI theater, did you ever run into Fred Friendly, who was also there? Hey, after the war, in 1946, what did you then do? Did you return to work in the theater?
I came back to work as an actor in the theater, and lo and behold, I hadn't grown up to be Clark Gable. I was a short, interesting looking being the euphemism for ugly Jew, and I knew that the acting career would be quite limited, but I still wanted to do it, and went back to acting for a number of years.
And what kinds of productions were you in?
I didn't work very much. Again, I think because it's the physical thing. I replaced Marlon in a Brando in a play called A Flag Is Born. And I did a play called Seas in the Wind, which sounds just horrible. Got a little bit of, vaguely remember some television work. Remember being on Studio One as an actor. And basically then finally, and again here I don't remember the year, just to make a living, I had heard that they were trying to set up a vocational high school called the High School of Performing Arts. And I don't know how it came about, but I met the principal. I went down, met the principal, and I set up the drama department there and became a teacher in the Board of Education, New York Public Schools.
For roughly how long did you do that?
I did it for 2 years.
So could you say a word about your experience at Actors Studio? Did you study there?
Yes, I did. I was in the original group, and I believe that was 1949. Again, I'm not when the studio was founded.
I think it was 47.
Was it 47? Was it that early? And at that time, Gad Kazan and Bobby Lewis and Cheryl Crawford were running the studio. The three of them were among the most successful directors and producer on Broadway. Cheryl was the most successful producer. Bobby had just had big hits with Brigadoon, and Kazan, of course, was already a legend. Streetcar had opened by then. I don't think Death of the Salesman had, but he was Broadway's premier director. Interestingly enough, Kazan took the advanced class. The beginner's class. And Bobby Lewis took the advanced class. The advanced class was the loaded class, the one that you've heard, the legendary one where all the names were. And Marlon was not there. That's not true. But Monty Clift was, and Tom Ewell, and it was a heavyweight division.
Why don't we stop here and we'll continue in a minute. What was your experience like at Actors Studio? Why did you not remain there longer? And what prompted you to form the Actors Workshop?
Well, they're connected. The work going on, at least in the advanced class, seemed to me useless work. Certainly at that time, American actors were the best realistic actors that I knew of, far superior to what I had seen from English actors. certainly from what I knew of the French theater, although I hadn't seen any, but what I had read about it and stylistically and so on. But the thing is that realism is only one style, and there are many other kinds of acting. And people were, I felt, bucking for jobs. I remember David Wayne and Tom Ewell came in with a scene of Mice and Men that they performed, and they had had that play out on tour. They had toured in the place. What was the point of bringing it in to what should have been a workshop, self-improving situation? At any rate, I voiced these concerns. I was working on Ostrovsky and he was trying to stretch as an actor. At any rate, after the first 3 months, I think, 13 of us were let go, and I was one of them. It was a devastating experience because Bobby Lewis had been a great friend during my whole growing up. He had directed My Heart's in the Highlands, which was one of my big successes in the theater as a kid actor. And he was responsible for my going away with the group theater as a child for the summer. They used to go away together for the summer to study. And that was a tremendously exciting experience for me. And so it was an enormous shock. And as always, when these kinds of shocks happen, you're going to react in one of two ways. It's either going to collapse you or it's going to drive you on to do something else. And so I took the other 12 people who had been let out of the studio, plus another 20, 30 actors that I knew. We were 40 in total. And made my own workshop called the Actors Workshop. The object of that was not to form a permanent company or anything like that. It was strictly for study. And what the process consisted of the following. It was a 3-year program, and I wanted to investigate different styles of acting. So there is a logical thread in the dramatic literature developed from one thing to another. And the idea here was to follow it backwards. Start with what we know, realistic acting. And spend very little time on that, only enough time to get a mutual vocabulary so that we wouldn't have to waste time with definition. So we went from modern playwrights, we just spent a couple of weeks on that, right back to Ibsen and Chekhov and Strindberg, founders of realistic drama. From the founders of realistic drama, it was a short step to Bernard Shaw, just the other side of the coin, to go to the comedic end. And from Shaw to Oscar Wilde, from Oscar Wilde to the Restoration playwrights, Sheridan and so on, from Sheridan to go to the Shakespearean comedies, from the Shakespearean comedies to the Shakespearean dramas, from the Shakespearean dramas to Greek drama. And that was the program. And we did this over 3 years, a 3-year period, and it was terrific. The actors had a marvelous time. Took the history of the periods, dealt with the costumes of the periods, the social conditions, the voice problems. We had a voice coach there, which the studio never had. We had a body movement coach there because certainly for Restoration and for Shakespeare, different kinds of physical equipment are needed. Fencing was needed. And at the end of 3 years, having accomplished this, we closed the joint down.
Who are some of the other people involved?
Well, let's see. I remember wonderful actress Mary Welch was involved, and Annie Jackson was involved. Yule Brynner, which is where my relationship began with Yule, and his wife Virginia Gilmore. Richard Kiley was there. It was a good bunch, an impressive bunch.
Was this your initial experience with directing?
Yeah, there were no directors. There was nobody to direct. So I just started staging scenes and directing various projects there. But it was the beginning of the directing.
Now, 1948, Seeds of the Wind was your last Broadway acting performance. Then you began to move into the television field. When did you first become aware of television? What were the first programs you watched? Did you attend the World's Fair back in 1939 when TV was exhibited?
I did attend the World's Fair in '39, but it was the same thing as the General Motors exhibit. It was just sheer futurist nonsense. You didn't take any of it seriously, and I really don't remember watching any television. First of all, I couldn't afford a set, and I remember my salary as a teacher was $38 a week, and I became aware of it when Yul Brynner called me up one day. He said, "Sidney, come on down. Nobody knows what they're doing. You make a nice living here." That was it.
And what was he doing, and where was
He was directing. Yul was directing. And by the way, parenthetically, a wonderful director. At that time, there were no dramas on yet. And Yul was directing the Stork Club, which was a show at the Stork Club, a live show under that monster, Sherman Billingsley. The crew loved it because he put out great chow. But there was a wonderful guy at CBS, man in charge, and I don't know whether he was director of programming or not. His name was Charlie Underhill. Charlie's idea was that drama was going to be one of the most important staples of of television nighttime. And he thought, well, we can teach them the technique. Let's get theater people in. That was the basic premise that he began. People who know acting, people who dealt with writers, who know about structure. And it was Charlie's policy to go out and try to get theater people. I know he hired Yul. I know he hired Marty Ritt. He hired me. He hired Bobby Mulligan. He hired Johnny Frankenheimer. He was a terrific guy. And that was a deliberate policy on his part.
All right, so in 1950, you were hired at CBS as an assistant director. So up until that time, you really did not own a television and did not
even seen it.
You'd not even seen it.
And what they did, this was really, again, I'm sure this was Charlie's wisdom. When you were first hired, you had 1 week of observation, and then you took over for 2 weeks a place called, don't ask me why, Residue. Residue was a room. I'm not sure. I don't remember where it was. I don't think it was on top of Grand Central, where a lot of the CBS studios were. But and it wasn't at 485, which was the radio building. I don't remember. At any rate, Residue was the room in which all of the stations of the network were cut in and cut out, were released, were brought in. And you were, so that, for instance, at 29:20 or 59:20, when a program ended, a half-hour program or an hour program ended, you would cue in the network commercial. There were certain commercials that were on network and certain commercials that were only on local. So you would cue in the network commercial at, as I say, 29:20. At 29:50, you would release the stations, cue in your own local commercial, 10-second commercial, cue in the local announcement. Oh, by the way, and also cue in the network announcement, and then cue in the reassembly of the network when the clock went straight up. The thing was that you threw in that time, in those 40 seconds, you threw maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 cues. So that's pretty speedy. And that brought you into the rhythm of what you would need later in live broadcasting.
So for what period of time were you doing that?
A week of observation and 2 weeks of working in residue.
And was that to prepare you to be an assistant director?
Yes, to prepare you to be an AD. Your job as an AD, there was a different system at NBC and a different system at CBS. The way it worked at CBS was the director was responsible for the on-camera camera. Most shows had 3 cameras. You, as the assistant director, were responsible for the cameras coming up. In other words, we've just cut to camera 1. So that means camera 2 has just been released. I now, over the intercom, tell camera 2, okay, you're on a close-up of her, or at the very beginning, get on the chopped liver when you'd be doing a cooking show. Close-up of the chopped liver. Camera 3, ready on close-up of Robert Q. Lewis or whoever it happened to be. The director would give the cue for the cutting so that what you'd be responsible for was the upcoming cameras. You'd be that step ahead of the director. The NBC system, the AD didn't have that much to do because the TD, the technical director, during rehearsal would have the cameraman write down their shots on a list and would just say, ready to, and they'd check off that shot once they'd finished with it. In the CBS system, the AD was responsible for that.
And I want to ask you about the program Danger, but before getting to that, I'm just curious about your feelings and the feelings of other people coming from the theater about television. I mean, you had spoken earlier, before the Second World War, you and others, just for a period, looked down upon film. Now, was there similar attitude towards broadcasting? Did you feel you were coming down in the world going into broadcasting, or not?
I didn't feel that. It was so exciting. It was so really crazy. I mean, Yule was doing the Store Club, so he was my rabbi. So I became Yule's AD. I was right away his assistant. As soon as I could get a show, I was doing. My 3 shows were Yule's show of the Store Club, the UN. CBS would do. There were always cameras at the UN, and the UN, they had to fill the airtime somehow. So they broadcast daily from the UN. I did that, which became my first acquaintance with the CBS News department, which I had a much closer relationship with them later on when you were there. And you'd be shifted around. I did Mama. Ralph Nelson was the director. I was the AD on Mama. I did a show with Ralph Bellamy, a detective show. I can't remember the name of it. And Ralph, a wonderful man as well as a brilliant actor, Ralph had hired for the show the first director who had ever used him in Ogunquit, Maine, in a stock company. The poor guy was 84 years old, didn't know where he was, couldn't hear, couldn't see, had no way he could keep up with this. And so Ralph gave me and the TD some of his own money, and we did the show between us in terms of camera. Also, by the way, one of the systems then was that you got extra money if you did a commercial. If you did the commercials, because otherwise a new director and the new AD would lean in over you to do the commercial.
Now, you worked on the program Danger at CBS from 1950 to 1955. Tell us a little bit about that program.
Well, the producer to begin with was Marty Ritt, and Yule was the director. Once a week, I still remember, Tuesday night, 10 to 10:30. Yule had come up with the idea of Tony Mottola doing the music, just the guitar as the only musical accompaniment. And as I say, Yule was a wonderful director. Then I was the AD. The show was, I think, quite successful from the very beginning. And it was sponsored by a terrific guy, Mel Block of the Block Drug Company. The Block Drug Company made Tyco-Pay toothbrushes and Amident toothpaste. Amident was the first toothpaste with chlorophyll. And when we get to talking about blacklisting later, I'll tell you why Mel was so sensational, and his brother Leonard. I don't remember how far into the run of the show it was, but at one point, Yule didn't know he had auditioned for Rodgers and Hammerstein for The King and I, and he didn't know whether he was going to take it. For the first time in his life, Yule had entertained at parties playing the guitar and then eating in the kitchen with the rest of the help. And now he was making good money. There was a minimum that you could earn as a director, but if the show was successful, like anything else, you could up your salary. And I think he was up to about $385 a week, which again, terrific money in 1951, whatever it was. And he didn't know whether he wanted to leave the security of that to go try another show. He also wasn't that crazy about Gertie Lawrence. And at any rate, we talked about it a great deal, he, Marty, and I. And he finally decided to take it. And when he did, I was upped to directing the show with another director, Kurt. Don't remember his name, but we alternated. I would do it one Tuesday, he would do the next.
What kind of budget did that show have? You recall?
The budgets were hilarious. Have you ever seen Studio 42 up in Grand Central? I doubt whether it even exists.
No.
I would say it's a room about maybe 40 by 60. And everything was jammed in there. 3 cameras, every set. There'd be usually 3-4 sets a show. We once did a show called Murder in the Museum. The entire room was the museum. It's hilarious. Might try to make the car, each shot looked like a different card, and this had to contain the actors and the props. Doors were sealed so that props that had to be used were over the prop table here with 2 prop men to hand them to the actors. A floor manager on a big show, sometimes 2 floor managers. When we used it for You Are There, we'd have 50 and 60 extras a show. So I don't know what the budget was, but the point was that there was no place to spend the money. Stars wouldn't do television. It was real come down for a movie star to do a television show. So that's one of the joyful, fortunate things about early television is that so many new actors got a break, because actors would be terrified, well-known actors would be terrified of showing up on television. So I don't know what the budgets were like, but as I say, they couldn't have cost anything because there was no place to put anything.
Do you recall who some of the actors were associated with Danger?
Oh, my God. Everybody. John Barroway, Dick Kiley, Johnny Connell, Joe Van Fleet, Sal Mineo. It's just endless. Between Danger and You Are There, I guess I would work with 500-600 different actors over a year, I was doing both shows simultaneously finally. And Paul Newman, of course, and Barry Jones and E.G. Marshall and Jack Warden and anybody, the entire cast of 12 Angry Men except for Fonda.
What was the format of the show, the basic nature of the program?
The show started, a spotlight would come on a wooden fence, and there'd be a dagger going boing, and Tony would vroom, vroom, and a voice would say danger, and tonight there'd be, if anybody starred in, title of the show, brought to you by Dissolve, to Dick. He was a lovely guy. Dick, damn it, the announcer. He announced for Pico-Pay toothbrushes and Amidon toothpaste, and we'd be into the first commercial. You'd have then the first act, mid program commercial, second act, and final commercial and credits.
Anything you want to share about the sort of technical challenges of the program in terms of the lighting, the cameras, the microphones, things that, let's say, people working today in television might not be familiar with?
Number one, the pressure was wonderful. And because it wasn't insane, the pressure was, can we do it? Because nobody knew what we could do or what we couldn't do. And nobody could say no to you because nobody knew. It was literally learning to walk. So there was nobody to say no. Charlie Underhill was first rate, and when Charlie left, I don't know why he left, his job was taken over by Bill Dozier, and Bill was wonderful. So that from a technical point of view, anything we wanted to try, we could try. The lighting began, I remember, very flat, just pan lighting, just scoops in every set. And slowly, like everything else, became more and more refined and interesting. And you'd have really fine lighting men. I remember a wonderful lighting guy that we had called Sal Bonsignori. And Sal really tried to create a mood on a set. Began using spotlights quite effectively. And also, since the lights couldn't change and had to account for a lot of action, there was very little specific. He couldn't get it too specific. It had you always had to have the scoops there for a general light, you know. There was a wonderful guy at ABC by the name of Imi Fiorentino. And Imi was a marvelous lighting guy. It was quite extraordinary how much mood they could get in while still staying within the general parameters. Also, the cameras needed a certain basic level of light simply to function. The lighting man was also under the control. He did not have final say. Final say went to the video control guys. There'd be one video control man for each camera, and he would set lens opening. He would set the diaphragm. The f-stop. He would set contrast. He would set everything that had to do with the quality of the picture, and he could overrule the lighting guy. If he said to the lighting guy, look, I can't handle that contrast, the lighting guy would have to add a general fill light to reduce the contrast. He in turn, of course, was responsible to the technical director. The audio men were wonderfully trained. I mean, I remember Billy Taylor, who would handle 16 pots on a show. Because the boom couldn't reach all the way I wanted it to, or because I wanted more freedom in my camera movement. And so I didn't want to do that scene on a boom. We did not have radio mics in those days. And Billy would hide mics all over the bloody set and would wind up with 16 mics on the show and have a script mark and open each mic because he couldn't leave the mic open because the amount of noise in the studio was enormous. The cameras carried behind them cables about that thick. And those would just slide on the floor. And you could hear it. So if a pot wasn't being used, it had to be closed and opened on a cue. It was out of this that all of these developments came. The same thing was true of the boom mics. We started out with the old RCA ribbon mics, which movies had been using for years, but they picked up everything. And so slowly Sennheiser developed highly directional mics, which are being used in movies today. All of the technical advancements which came in movies, television brought in, because movie companies never gave a damn. They never invested the money in it. The networks had to. They started with old movie equipment. They started with the old enormous dollies for the main camera. Usually you'd have what we call two pedestal cameras and a dolly camera for the middle camera. And it would be counterweighted so that the cameraman himself could raise the camera and lower it. But it was still made out of the old movie dolly that you had to do with those handles and gears. The pedestal cameras had these skirts on them, which cleared the floor by about 1/4 of an inch. The floors were usually some kind of composition, but they were very, very level so that the cameras could move easily on them and without any sound. But, of course, the skirts would push the cables ahead of them or drag the cables behind them, and the noise would come. The cables themselves went into a wall. In other words, the four walls of the studio. You might have, when you were setting it, the setup was very important, because if you put a cable into this wall for this camera and put a cable into this wall for this camera, you better not wind up like that, because if you got your cables twisted, the cameras wouldn't be able to move. So all of these things had to be figured out in meticulous detail. The greatest leap forward, I must say, belonged to me when all of a sudden I got so tired of being limited by where I could move my cameras because of their cables coming out of the walls. I said, I know what we do. We're going to run them up from the walls into the grid and drop them down the middle.
Let's stop here and we'll continue in a minute.
Yeah. So once the cables were dropped down the middle, of course, they could just go anywhere. And it didn't matter if they were pleated by the end of the show, as long as it was by the end of the show. A couple of other interesting technical things that we did was in the and I don't know how Billy did this. He would, as I say, these were not radio mics. He would sometimes ask for an extra cable man for the audio, and he would take a mic like this, although it was in those days quite a bit bigger. It'd be about like that. It was called a peanut. And he would put it on the actor on a line just like this and run it down through the clothes. The actor had to move, and God help you if the actor got his feet messed up. But he worked it out very carefully and with a cable man, so that he got a good level on an actor. He was very ingenious. You would fight for good video control men and good lighting men, because of course every director wanted them. And so when I started doing You Are There, I don't remember. I guess I'd been doing Danger for about a year or maybe two. When CBS asked Charlie Russell and myself to start doing You Are There. And we looked at each other and said, well, two's not much harder than one. And we were doing 2 half-hour shows a week.
Now, given the special technical requirements of live TV, were there ever, let's say, major problems, mishaps, or
The two that I remember was on Danger once. I was doing a very intense melodramatic card game around a round table and had worked it out so that the cameras would have dollied in over 3 different shoulders so that the audience could see what cards were being held as we cut from hand to hand. Having gotten in, I suddenly realized that it was one of the few times I didn't get a dress rehearsal in. I suddenly realized I couldn't get out without revealing the other 2 cameras. And so there was nothing to do but pull 2 back simultaneously, and cut up and back between them, hoping that I could avoid seeing the cameras. But I caught a complete camera with cameraman on camera. The one hilarious thing that I remember was when we were on You Are There, doing You Are There, and it was Walter Cronkite's first big job as an anchor man. It really kind of made Walter, I think, as well as should. He was just wonderful. And we were doing the Burning of Joan of Arc, and we were again in Studio 42. And so we had special effects, and there were no special effects because nobody had ever done it before. So the prop department put these troughs in between branches that could not catch fire because otherwise poor Kim Stanley would have run up in flames. And as Kim died and the flames were up and the smoke was coming up, and then we would cut to the final scene was to cut to Dunois, 100 miles away, and there was a lovely actor by the name of, I believe it was either John Barragray or I don't remember, playing as the smoke was going through. And then we cut to Walter, who say, "What kind of a day has it been?" And like all days, Walter, you could barely see him. The smoke was so thick because, of course, the air conditioning couldn't get rid of it. But actually, those were the only 2 sort of technical disasters that I remember. Generally, we worked it out rather well.
now you mentioned Charles Russell, who was producer of Danger. Could you
And you were there.
describe him? What his responsibilities were? Did that include dealing with the network?
Charlie was a remarkable man. He was a country bumpkin, Iowa, some kind of place where they hey-ho or whatever they do out there. Had gone to Hollywood, good-looking guy, as a contract player for 20th Century Fox. And never got past the $75 a week category. You can see him still in a movie called 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. He has a small part. And had evidently some kind of traumatic experience out there, or experiences. Unhappy marriage. Came east, just wanted out, away from there. Had never been a producer in his life. Now, the job of a producer at that time was to literally be the go-between, not only the normal producing job of working with the director, hiring of writers, casting, etc., etc., But also in those days, there, there were those awful jobs of dealing with the agency, the advertising agency, and dealing with the network. So you had two people on your back. Once it got going a little and things started being successful, then the crap started. Then the network started giving you its opinion, and the advertising agency started giving you their opinion, and sometimes the sponsor started giving you their opinion. And that had to be handled. And Charlie was adept at it. He was a good solid drinker, which helped a great deal, especially with the guys from the advertising agencies, because everything could be settled at a little bar across the street. And mainly he kept them off my back, which was wonderful. In addition, one of the reasons I loved Mel Block, for instance, is that when we were on our second year or third year of Danger, the show was now successful, and we wanted to do more and more esoteric, interesting stuff rather than just shoot 'em up, bang, bang. And Charlie went in and negotiated a deal with Mel, which was done all on a handshake. It was, okay, Mel, I'll tell you what we'll do. Because in those days, both the advertising agency and the sponsor, if he wanted it, and the network had script approval. Everybody had script approval except us. And Charlie said, I'll tell you what, now, what if we do 2 for you and 1 for us? In other words, we'll do 2 scripts that you like, and then 1 script nobody, the network, nobody has anything to say about that we'll do. And Mel agreed to it, and we did one of the terrific, memorable live half-hour shows, then a show called The Paper Box Kid that Marty Ritt acted in. And it's quite a remarkable show.
What was the basic theme of the show?
The theme was just of a kind of mentally slow guy who loved music, falling in love with Piaf's recording of Vie en Rose, and dancing with this beautiful, beautiful girl in a candy store, which had a jukebox, and then being accused of molesting her. And all he had done was wanted to dance with her. It was a wonderful show.
The actors that you worked with, people like Grace Kelly, James Dean, Mike Wallace, Jack Lemmon, Steve Allen, and others, how did they have difficulties adapting as actors to television? And what was it like working with them? Anything that stands out that you want to share with us?
They loved it only because it was a living and a very nice one. I mean, just our little factory of Danger and You Are There, if we used you 6 times a year, it'd be hard to use you more because then you'd start getting too familiar. It could pay your nut. That could take care of your rent for the year. And that's just our 2 shows. There were a lot of other shows, as you know, and we were half-hour shows. The hour shows paid even better. So the only difficulty that anyone had, and it took a little time to overcome this, all of them, from either their theater training or in the few movies that they had done, had, of course, in the theater training, there was no looking at a camera. But in the movie training, the one thing you never did was that. You never looked into the lens. We evolved this style on You Are There where the camera was the interrogator, was the correspondent. We didn't hit our stride till about the 4th or 5th show. At the beginning, I'm embarrassed to say, we played around we put the correspondents in costume. We never showed them. For the audience that doesn't know about this, You Are There was a show in which historical incidents were recreated, being covered by modern news techniques. In other words, network correspondents are present, and tell me, Julius Caesar, hasn't it been a bad day in the Senate? That kind of thing. So at the beginning, for Julius Caesar, we played around with Harry Reasoner or Mike Wallace, or a shoulder, just the feeling of a toga, and the arm and the microphone out there. Well, that was rapidly became ludicrous. Dropped that idea after the first show, and then tried them in modern dress, performing the same function. Again, an anachronism, because Tell Me Joan was the fire hot with a modern over a modern shoulder. Again, wasn't workable. Finally, by about the fourth show, I think one of the writers came up with this technique. I didn't think of it. I wish I had, which was that the camera was the interrogator, was the correspondent, and the interview always began with a fresh cut. In other words, if you and I were on a two-shot, as part of the drama of conversation between us, when Mike Wallace came in, oh, Julius Caesar, and I would turn to Mike Wallace on a separate cut to its own camera. The problem for the actor was that we kept trying to get the correspondents to be as close to the camera as possible so that their eye line wouldn't be troubled. And we found that at the beginning, the first time anybody was ever on the show and had to talk into the lens, they almost invariably dried up. They almost invariably lost their concentration, forgot their lines, because it was such a violation of everything that they had been taught, that their concentration wandered.
James Dean, what was it like working with him?
It was wonderful. I did two shows with Jimmy. We did a Danger, and I don't remember what that was about. The You Are There that we did was a terrific show in which he played, it was the death of Jesse James, and he played the wicked Bob Ford, who shot Jesse in the back. And he had all that kind of sultry, Jimmy Dean, not quite looking at you, sulkiness, and it was great for Bob Ford.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask a little bit more about You Are There, but first, why did you stop working at Danger in 1955? Did the show cease?
The show ended. And You Are There had become such a success.
Why did Danger end?
I think, I think it only ran, if it went as late as 55.
Yes.
I think, number one, I think I may have left it before it ended. I think I was just tired. When you're doing 2 shows a week, you're carrying 8 shows up here. There's the show that you're on camera with, right? You Are There was a Sunday, Danger was a Tuesday. That means you went on camera Sunday morning and Tuesday morning. That meant that you were already working on the script of the show that came up 3 weeks later, working on the sets and costumes of the show that came up 2 weeks later, working on the casting of the show that was coming up next week, plus your 2 shows coming up this week. So you were carrying 8 shows in your head. Now, I'm eternally grateful to it. It gave me a sense of organization that I still have today. It's the reason I've had this reputation of coming in on schedule and on budget, because nothing is too complicated for me after that. Nothing. Movies are a snap after that, because this was carrying 8 shows a week in my head. But it did get tiring, and I think after doing it for 2 years, I left You Are There and went on to both I mean, I left Danger, went on to You Are There, but also started doing other CBS shows.
Right. Just anything you want to say about the writers that you worked with on Danger, like um, Abraham Polonsky, Arnold Manoff, and Walter Bernstein?
Well, they were the blacklisted group, the eventual blacklisted group, and all three of them were writing under their own names on Danger. But there were other marvelous writers on Danger. Arnold Schulman. Paddy Chayefsky's first show was on Danger. And the thing that mattered just so enormously in my own life, because it provided me with my first movie, Reginald Rose, who wrote 12 Angry Men, which was an NBC, became an NBC show, but we had done many shows together. Gee, there were others too. So many others.
Would you interact with them and change the script, or did you
Not a
pretty
gr-
much go with what they brought you?
Not a great deal. There was almost there'd be maybe one conference about a rewrite. You pretty well produced what you bought. Mind you, I didn't get it. It was much like the old system in Hollywood. The director didn't get the script until after CBS had gotten its rewrites, the advertising agency had gotten the rewrites it wanted, and the sponsor had gotten the rewrites it wanted. Then it was handed to you. Just like in the old days in Hollywood, the director came on 2 weeks, 3 weeks before a picture was going to start shooting.
We were talking about You Are There. Anything you want to say about, other than what you've mentioned so far, about your work with the correspondents, not only Cronkite, but Mike Wallace, Bill Leonard, Edward P. Morgan, Charles Collingwood?
Right. And Don, he killed himself.
Hollenbeck.
Don Hollenbeck, extraordinary man who would do the London Sunday Times crossword puzzle using only the vertical or the horizontal, not both. There's a great deal to say about that. Now, this is only my idea. I couldn't prove it. I don't know whether it's so. That news department, there's a reason for the myth of it. The myth is true. It's not a myth. They were extraordinary. They were great correspondents. They were probably a little left of center, just a hair, nothing very radical. Mostly they were in love with their work and serious. They wrote their own. They didn't read a text that the way it's done today, or that somebody else had written. Walter would be at that typewriter. Not on You Are There, because it needed a certain introduction, little, and certain background facts. But on his own show, Walter wrote his own, as did almost all the correspondents. When the blacklist came in, CBS had a much tougher time than NBC. I could use actors. By that time, I think I was freelancing. Further along, I was freelancing. I was doing shows on NBC and CBS, and I could use actors on NBC that I could not use on CBS. The reason that this happened, I think, and this is all supposition on my part, I know that the most intense fight of the whole blacklisting period came about because they wanted to break up the CBS news department. They were convinced. By they, I mean the Red Channels people, the American Legion. It probably went up to HUAC, would be my guess. But, communist-ridden, these left-wing guys, blah, blah, blah. Paley, it's the only time Paley put down, no, the news department is untouchable. Now, I don't know whether he did that on his own or because he knew that he would lose Murrow if he gave in that much. They were particularly after Don Hollenbeck. Harry Reasoner, who became if I remember correctly, became fairly right-wing when he became a commentator on ABC.
You're not thinking of Howard K. Smith, are you?
No, I'm not thinking of Howard.
Who also became more conservative when he left and went to ABC.
It might be. It might be. You know, I'm dealing with a lot of years and a lot of names ago. It might be Smith. I'm not sure whether it's Reasoner or Smith. At any rate, it was with an H. That I remember. But I don't. As I say, I don't know whether it was Murrow or whether it was Paley himself. But the result was that there was far more blacklisting pressure in terms of actors on CBS and in terms of directors. I know my co-director on Danger when we first began, Kurt, I couldn't remember his second name. I think he was let go because of blacklisting. I think Marty Rick was let go on producing the show, and Charlie Russell took over because of the blacklist. And I had my own run-in with him, and my life was saved by Mel Block, another reason I'm eternally grateful to him.
How did he save you?
He didn't knuckle under. When he called me one day and he said, Sidney, your name has appeared in the American Legion magazine. The American Legion magazine was one of the code sources to start Mr. Johnson in Syracuse with his postcard and letter writing campaign to the sponsors to get rid of Sidney Lumet or this one, the other one. And he said, I'm not going to give in. And about 6 weeks later, he said to me, Sidney, the pressure is enormous. They have taken Pico-Pay toothbrushes and Amidon toothpaste off the shelves in all of Mr. Johnson's supermarkets and in a couple of other cities because it was very organized. And he said, we're just taking a brutal beating. He said, I'd like you to do two things. And if you say no, I will understand. It's totally your decision. And then I will try to back you as long as I can. But I'm telling you, I've got real troubles. I said, what are the two things? He said, I'd like you to go see Dan O'Shea. And if all goes well with Dan, then I'll talk to you about.
He was operating really the CBS internal.
He was in charge of blacklisting at CBS.
Well,
Is what it amounted to. Everybody was salving his conscience. There were no her consciences to be salved in those days. Everybody was salving his conscience by saying, "Oh no, he's trying to protect your job." The fact of the matter was, he was doing the Inquisitor's work for him. And was he the head of General Tire and Rubber? I think he was. He was a great Catholic lay contributor to the church and so on. He was, silly word to use, kosher beyond kosher in terms of his Catholic bona fides. And there were Catholic organizations involved in the blacklisting. And as you know, there was Legion of Decency involved in movie pressures too. And he had been hired by Paley. He had his own office at 485. I came up, I saw him. Very civilized man, gentle, nice. Couldn't have had a better conversation. So good, in fact, that I was leaving. I said to him, Dan, how can you do this job? And then he said the most remarkable thing. He said, better one of us than one of them. Now, I mean, it shows you how we can rationalize our own actions. I'm not saying this pejoratively about him. I'm sure I'm capable of the same self-rationalization as we all are. He actually thought he was doing something constructive and helpful. He was doing their work for them.
Right.
At any rate, whatever he had said to Mel as a result of this, Mel said, now I've got one more thing for you to do, and this is tougher. And I said, what? Now, I was afraid he was going to ask me to, HUAC was always showing up in town, and I didn't know whether they were coming in, whether he would ask me to take a private session, etc. He said, I want you to come to my house on such and such a date. And he said, present are going to be Victor Rizel and Harvey Matuso. Now, for you people who will not know either of these names.
I know Victor Rizel. I don't remember who.
Victor Rizel was a labor columnist for the New York Daily Mirror, very anti-communist and very anti-racket, and had, as a result of his articles in the New York Daily Mirror, been literally blinded. He'd been come out of the Daily Mirror one day, and some union goon walked up to him and threw a bucket of lye right into the eyes, and he was blinded for life. Harvey Matuso was with a woman by the name of Elizabeth Bentley, the chief government witness against the Communist Party during the whole McCarthy period. This whole period in American history is totally shameful. Nobody comes out well. There was something called the Smith Act, which was subsequently declared unconstitutional, which condemned the leaders of the Communist Party. I think there was a 12-member Politburo, as conspiring to overthrow the government of the United States. The fact that it was a violation of the Constitution, that all got settled later. But in the meantime, the government put on trial the 12 members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the United States. The chief witnesses against them were Elizabeth Bentley and Harvey Matuso.
Why don't we stop here and we'll continue in the next tape.
Okay. He said, they are the ones who named you for the American Legion magazine, which was the beginning of all these troubles. And he was living somewhere on Park Avenue. I was living on 62nd.
He being
a Mel Block.
right.
And on the appointed night, I left my place. I was living on 62nd between Madison and Park, walked up to his, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I did not feel like a hero. I sure in hell didn't want to lose my job, because it would have been the end. And I felt, I was hoping desperately that as I crossed the street, a truck would hit me and decide the issue, so that I wouldn't even have to show up. But I went on up and got into the elevator, and the elevator went up to Mel's apartment. The doors opened into the apartment, no hallway. And there across the room were Harvey and Rizel, Matuso and Rizel, and totally instinctively, unbeknownst to me, I behaved, quote unquote, well. As I was crossing the room, I started cursing them out. What right do you have, you bastards? You did it, up. And as I reached them, as I was about this distance, 5 feet away, and yelling at the top of my voice, Matuso said, "Don't get your balls in an uproar, 'cause you're not the one." Now, Mel was sitting right here, and he grabbed the back of my jacket like that. Like, shut up, we're home. And then Mel offered me a drink. They each had a drink. And literally, I think Matuso, who had the sensitivity of a clod of earth, started talking about ball games. And in 3 minutes, and I got up and put my drink down and said, "Well, I got to go." And Matuso said, "Me too." And came with me to the elevator. He said, "Can I give you a lift?" That was the end of him until 2 years later. I come into my office one day at CBS, and my secretary says in a panic, "There are two FBI guys waiting to see you." I go in, I sit down. How do you do? How do you do? And I mean, it was like cliches of FBI guys: the fedoras, without. It was warm enough that there were not even trench coats, just a suit and a fedora. And each of them sits opposite me at the desk. Each takes out a pad and is writing, and I'm trying to see if I can see what they're writing. And every time I do, the pad comes up higher. And they are asking me now about Harvey Matusow. The government wanted to now indict Harvey Matusow because he had married a very rich lady and found God and had now recanted all of his testimony that he had given against the communists in the original Smith Act trial, and meant that the government's whole cases were out the window. So now the solution for them was to nail Matusow. And I said to the guys, I said, "Fellas, I'll be absolutely honest with you. I'd love to help you nail him. I can only give you my impression. Was he a lunatic that day? No, he was not a lunatic. Was he? Did he behave irrationally? No, he behaved insensitively. I wish I could tell you he was out of his mind, but I can't." And that was the end of the Matusow story. But what I should add, again, because God knows at what point this is all going to be seen by anybody, as crazy as this period sounds for America, we not only went through it, we have been through this kind of thing at least 3 times in our history before. Once under Thomas Jefferson, and once at the end of the 19th century, and once at the end of World War I. And we may, as far as I know, go through it again. It was a period of extreme reaction about civil rights, in this case, political civil rights, in this case, brought about by the so-called threat of communism, which may have been real. It began in 1947 with Winston Churchill making a speech in Fulton, Missouri, in which he used the expression, an iron curtain is descending across Europe, and was picked up in America by the right wing, particularly by a senator by the name of Joseph McCarthy.
Right. The speech was made in the United States.
The speech was made in Fulton, Missouri, yeah.
Right.
And McCarthy then began with the big right-wing cause. China had just gone communist, and the big right-wing cause was who lost China. As if somebody in America was responsible for the loss of a country of 2 billion people, or whatever they were then. At any rate, McCarthy showed up one day with calling a news conference, pulling out a sheaf of papers from his pocket, saying, "I have here a list of 200 or 800 members of the State Department who are members, 200, of the Communist Party of the United States. This laxness will end," etc. And then started a witch hunt. It started first in the State Department. One of these groups that went after were homosexuals, by the way. They were considered security menaces because they could be blackmailed, and then extended very rapidly into the movie and television industry. It never affected the theater or publishing.
Now, what about the loyalty oath at CBS? Were you or others asked to sign a loyalty oath?
I don't remember being asked to sign a loyalty oath. Now, I may be blocking that out. What did your research show? Were we all asked to sign one?
Well, I'm more familiar with the news end, and where people were asked, but it was a somewhat selective process, and I think more prominent, usually certain people were targeted for that. But I'm really asking you whether
I don't remember it. I don't remember being asked to sign one because I remember a lot about that time, obviously, because it was extremely painful, dangerous. Friends were involved. I don't remember that. I think I would have remembered. And also, those of us behind the scenes were not nearly as important. I remember Lucille Ball got called.
right.
And I remember Desi Arnaz issuing a statement to the press. The only thing red about Lucy is her hair. And it was also very interesting. This I do remember, at least a feeling that CBS would protect the people who were commercially valuable to them. Like Lucy was everything. I mean, they would have told HUAC to go screw themselves rather than give up Lucy. She doesn't have too much. I might have had some value because directing 2 hit shows was not unimportant, just in terms of revenue. I at least think that's what opened up the possibility of a conversation with Dan O'Shea, because I know of a lot of other people who were just summarily fired without any hearing at all.
Did O'Shea ask you specifically about your political past?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And I told him I'd never been a communist. I was certainly left wing. Yes, I did vote for Henry Wallace, but and I didn't get on any high horse about you have no right to ask me this. I wanted to work. That's why I didn't know how well I'd behave when I went up to Mel's house to see Matuso, because with O'Shea, I at least walked in thinking, oh, he's out to help me.
Now, the blacklisted writers like Polanski, Walter Bernstein, Arnold Manoff, did they continue to write for CBS using other names?
It's one of the great romantic stories. You've heard it from them, and so I don't know how much detail you want me to go into. You want me to go into it? Okay. Arnie Manoff and Walter Bernstein and Abe Polanski were a triumvirate. They were close friends, close personal friends, close political friends, and all 3 of them had been writing for us fairly openly on Danger. Polanski, after he had been blacklisted from Hollywood, because he had a good, solid Hollywood career going, came east because he couldn't work there anymore. When blacklisting hit, and the 3 of them were immediately knocked out of the box, they did the most romantic thing. They said, look, we don't know which of us will get hired again, if ever. Why don't we set up a co-op? And let's find fronts. And it's going to be complicated because a check is going to have to be made out to, I remember one of the names was Kate Nickerson. So that CBS is going to have to make out a check to Kate. And there's going to be tax deducted. And Katie's going to have to pay tax, so we're going to have to reimburse her. And we're going to have to pay tax, et cetera, et cetera. So it got very complicated. But what we will do is, if one of us is hired, we all 3 split the check. If things go good and there's a lot of work, then you may have to do the first act and I'll do the second act, and Abe, you do the third act if we're on deadlines and things like that. So they set up that kind of a co-op. This was all done through the wonderful Charlie Russell, who didn't have a political bone in his body. He was just a sweet, open guy from the Midwest who thought this was too fucking unfair, and he was going to do anything he could to break it, fight it. Hopefully not putting himself in any jeopardy. He also was very careful, not only trying to protect himself, but he wanted to protect me. And if I ever wanted to talk about something, he would say, give me your notes and I'll bring them to the writer. So I didn't know for a number of months about this arrangement that the guys had. Charlie was protecting me. And also that way protecting himself, because if I ever got called, he didn't want me in a position of having to say what I knew or didn't know.
So did you actually not know that they were writing this?
Not at the beginning. Not at the beginning. And then I got suspicious of the fact that we were using these three writers over and over again. I've forgotten. Kate Nickerson, I don't know why I remember that name. Except I know why, because a woman writer in television was so rare then. And these names.
There was there a real Kate Nickerson?
Yes, these all had to be real people.
Right.
Who were in on it and could add. I may be wrong here. Maybe memory is playing me tricks. It might be worth looking up. I think that somebody named Kate Nickerson was press secretary for Governor Rockefeller at one point. And I would love to know if it was the same person. I don't know. But there's something deliciously ironic about it if it was the same person. At any rate, I'm sure that in addition to Charlie, Bill Dozier, who was the head of programming, dramatic programming for CBS, had to know. Bill was no fool. You Are There was one of the really prestigious shows. He kept very close hands on it, watched it, not only watched it, but, he was around on camera day. I, of course, began to wonder about it when I could never meet the writers, because normally, for instance, on Danger, we would very often, for the first reading, have the writer there so that if there were any little changes to be made, the writer could make them. But on You Are There, that never happened. And then eventually Charlie told me.
Now, looking at specific scripts like the Salem witch trial and the execution of Joan of Arc, was the reality of the blacklist and that all that was going on that you've described in that period, did those productions speak to the situation?
They were deliberate choices because of the situation. In fact, I'm trying to remember, but when Murrow did his McCarthy show, we deliberately scheduled, and I'm not sure whether it was the recantation of Galileo or the Salem witch trials, for 2 weeks later. And we were on, Murrow's show was on Sunday. He was on right after us. We were 6:30 to 7, if I remember correctly, and he was 7 to 7:30. So it was deliberate on our parts, absolutely. And in fact, I remember when we did Salem witch trials, we hired for the prosecutor, I believe his name was Vince Harding. And Vince, who was a very good actor, was one of the Red Channels guys. He was one of the guys who gave names to Red Channel.
Is that right?
Was one of the editors. Yeah. We thought it was a kind of nice inside joke, but everybody in the industry would know.
Right. Did you get, was it taking a risk to do shows like that at that point?
We were so kosher by then, just as an educational show. And I mean, it's not as if these were minor incidents in history.
Right.
So we didn't run into any difficulty. Although I must tell you, it was with a bit of a thrill and a bit of a frisson. We thought we were being very brave when we did them.
Were there any other actors or writers that you would work with or were close to that were blacklisted?
Well, the actors you couldn't use. because everybody, when you cast, the name had to go up to Dan O'Shea's office, and it would come back down. No, you can't hire them. Also, it had to be done in such a way that it was all deniable, because an actor could have sued. So the actors never appeared, other than Walter, Abe, and Arnie. Those were the only 3 blacklisted writers I worked with on those shows. I know that Susskind was using them too, David. And, you know, the horror of this kind of world is that rumor gets out. Hey, I hear so on and so forth is in trouble. And all of a sudden, people would pull away without anything have happened, but nobody wanted to be associated with anyone who was potentially going to be blacklisted. I remember when my contract was up at CBS, and I had to make a decision about whether I wanted to go freelance or not. Because obviously freelancing, money would be much better. I'd get my pick of much better shows, because a lot of the hour shows were only on NBC, Philco, Kraft Playhouse. Those were NBC shows. And so I remember going up to see David with my agent at the time. David was doing at least 2 one-hour shows a week. And we talked, and I said, yeah, I'd like to do some shows. And for some reason, the agent and David started talking about money right then and there. Usually that is done outside of the client's hearings, but not this time. They started talking about money, and Alden, the agent's name is Alden Schwimmer, he looked over at me, and I went, no. And we got up and started to leave, and I was at the doorway. And David stopped me. He said, Sidney, it's important that you do this show. Now, I don't remember whether it was Philco, I think it was Kraft, but at any rate, the agency was J. Walter Thompson. And if you worked for J. Walter Thompson because of whoever was running a J. Walter Thompson at that time, you were cleared. It was as good as if you had testified before HUAC. They were the most right-wing agency, and they amounted to clearance. And that's what David meant, and I never forgave him for that, because he was trying to beat me down on the money, because word had obviously gotten out that I was iffy.
Yeah, right. Can you talk a little bit about your increasing involvement with the anthology drama series, and also you in the mid-50s you returned to Broadway to direct The Doctor's Dilemma. How did that come about that you were
my whole background had been theatrical, as you know. I was one of the reasons that I finally decided to to go freelance, precisely because there was on the 1 and 2 hour shows, there was just better drama going on. We would, and a lot of them were plays. I remember I did Philadelphia Story. As stars were starting to come into television by then. I did it with Dorothy McGuire, who was just wonderful. And I loved working with her. So that canvas was a much more exciting canvas to go to. When you were doing a half-hour show, you were actually doing a 22, 23-minute show because of commercial time, and this was at least 45, 46 minutes. So that was the choice, and I had never really given up. Certainly going to the theater and knowing theater people. And my guess is that Norrie Houghton, who was one of the artistic directors of the Phoenix Theater. I'm pretty sure, it's interesting, all of these things accumulate in your life. I'm pretty sure, and by the way, this is the same reason, part of the same reason I got 12 Angry Men as my first picture. When I had my workshop downtown, at the end of the year to raise money, we always did, if possible, a new play each year. We were only in existence 3 years, but we did 3 new plays. And one year we did a very interesting play called Ward 6 about guys who'd been wounded in the war. And I'm pretty sure I directed it, and I'm pretty sure Nori Houghton saw that. And I know Hank Fonda saw it. 2 of the kids who were in Mr. Roberts were in our workshop and brought him down to see it. And when 12 Angry Men came up, and Hank was co-producer on it with Reggie Rose, and I said to Reggie, said, I'd like you to do this. And I said, well, what about Fonda? I've never done a picture before. Will he accept me? He said, oh, he saw your production downtown in the village and thought you just did a marvelous job. So he's all for it. So that's how even the first picture happened. And I think that's how Doctor's Dilemma happened.
Alcoa Hour. You started working in 1956 for that NBC series.
That late, huh?
How did that show compare with other television experiences you had, and what was it like working with Herbert Vrodkin?
I liked Herbert. He was a set designer, originally, and I always thought that Herbert didn't know as much as he thought he knew. He was quite inarticulate. He was a very nice man, a sweet, good heart. And he did have this theory, and there was some justice in it. A 17-inch set was a big screen in those days. We're still just barely into rectangular screens. When did the round screens end? Do you remember what year? And the rectangular screens, because that was a great leap forward, but it wasn't that long ago. So his big theory, since most people had 10 and 12-inch sets, was close up, close up, close up, close up. I would argue with him a lot because if everything's going to be close up, you have no point of emphasis. When you really need it, where are you when I need you? You've used it up. But he always had an exciting eye for material. He was courageous about the material he chose, politically courageous. The Blacklist, if I remember correctly, wasn't over. And I remember we did shows like Tragedy in a Temporary Town, Reggie's show, which politically was.
Do you want to describe that briefly? And Jack Warden was in that?
Jack was in everything. Whenever I had a part for a male, Jack was in the show. One of my favorite actors ever. As I remember, it was about a camp where you took your trailer and parked your trailer overnight, about people who were just on the move all the time without any permanent base. Somebody, and it may have been either Johnny Cassavetes or Sal Mineo, I'm not sure which, but some swarthy-looking person had been accused of doing something dastardly, and these rednecks got together, and I don't know whether they lynched him or tried to lynch him. And at the end of it, Lloyd Bridges rescued the kid and made this big anti-lynching, anti-redneck speech. That's what I remember about it.
Okay, let's take a break here. Oh, ready?
Yeah. So at the end of Tragedy in a Temporary Town, Lloyd has this big speech in which he curses out all these rednecks. And this is live, and Lloyd got terribly, terribly involved emotionally in this, both the subject matter and his part. And I had stolen it from some movie. I don't know what. This is supposed to be at night, and he was, of course, lit by the car lights. 6 cars with their headlights on, and he's in the middle screaming at all these guys who are all vague in the shadows. And he flipped out in the middle of the speech. And he was carrying a big stick. And he started, "You sons of bitches!" And he picked up his stick and started smashing the headlights of the cars that were lighting the scenes, yelling, "You bastards!" And total flip. And dramatically, it was wonderfully impressive. I don't know how many calls the CBS switchboard got, or NBC, or I've forgotten which network it was on. But it was NBC. It was a very impressive night. And actually, there wasn't that much to do about it. I mean, the show worked so well. I think people were just swept along with it.
Right. Just a quick question about 12 Angry Men. Originally, it was a Studio One teleplay. Did you ever see that?
Was it Studio One?
I believe it was.
I thought at any rate, I did not see it. I thought it was NBC. Franklin Schaffner directed the original, the TV show.
I might be wrong here.
And I thought Frank was with NBC, but I may be wrong.
Right. Do you want to say a word on the difference, as a director, working in film, working on 12 Angry Men, as opposed to directing a television show? Was it very liberating for you? Or was the nature of that particular movie with you're being in one room, was it very teleplay-like?
There was no enormous release that, I'm doing a movie, because I was hardly doing Red River, right? The biggest difference, and it took me a lot of movies, 5, 6, maybe 7 movies before I really understood it. The biggest difference was the difference in scale. You have to tell a story differently on a 17-inch piece of glass as opposed to a 40-foot image. They say very different things to an audience with different speed. It becomes much clearer sooner when it's bigger. And you have to adjust your storytelling for that. And it is a tremendously difficult adjustment to make, because you're used to one kind of dramatic emphasis, and you suddenly have to retool completely. Having said that, there are certain things that are an enormous help, having come from TV to movies. The laws of optics are constant. The 35mm lens does the same thing on this camera as on a still camera, as on a movie camera, as on a television camera. There's 35mm of distance between where the light crisscrosses and whatever the recording surface is, whether it's film or an image orthicon tube or what have you. And my knowledge of lenses, which is encyclopedic, comes from my live television training. When I was telling you earlier about, as an AD, I would be lining up the shot, the upcoming shot, with the 2 cameras that were off the air. In those days, each camera had a turret of 4 lenses, and the turret was turned. It was flipped mechanically, so that you could have 12 lenses, use 12 different lenses on a show. very often the queuing was coming so rapidly that you didn't have time to check, hey, are you on a 75 or a 50? Within a very short time, you had to be able to tell by eye what lens he was on, whether he was on the right lens. And that was just of extraordinary value to me once I began doing movies.
Mm-hmm. I just want to ask a series of questions in general on directing before we talk specifically about Studio One. Right, in the mid to late 1950s, you directed teleplays for a variety of anthology television shows. How did it work? How were you assigned the work? Was it an agent who got the work? How did you happen to do a teleplay at this or that?
The rules were the same then as they are now. I had done 2 hit shows, so I was in demand. It was as simple as that. The same way as if you've had a hit movie, the scripts start coming in. And the same thing applied to television. Both Danger and You Are There had been successful shows. And then also, once I started anthology series, I was developing a very good reputation among actors. So if they could get me to direct it, it might be possible to get this or that star to do the show. I don't know if it made any difference to Dorothy McGuire that I was doing Philadelphia Story, but I'm sure it didn't hurt. It was very risky for a star to go to a live television shows in those days. I don't think even Playoff 90 had begun by then, or maybe it just had. And so who the director was mattered in terms of getting names to go into the show.
Did you? This was a golden age for television drama. Were you following the work of other directors and influenced by the work of others on television, or were you pretty much doing your own thing?
There's no time. I never saw another show. I was literally just bouncing from one to another. I have no idea whether how many shows I did, but it was an awful lot.
Give us a sense of how you prepared for a program. An example of a typical week and the production program and for one of these teleplays.
It was all pretty similar, and it was just longer periods of time from the description I gave you earlier about when we were doing Danger and You Are There, which is first work on script, then into the physical details and problems of the production, costuming and sets, plus casting, and then into rehearsal. The rehearsals were interesting periods. If my memory is correct, we would generally, for an hour show, for a half-hour show, we would rehearse 4 days and have 1 day on camera, the same day as what was the air day. For an hour show, we rehearsed a week. By that I mean 7 days, even though it might not include a weekend. And we had 2 days on camera, one of them being the day that we actually did the show, which was almost always at night. So we'd have a day of camera and another day of camera, winding up with doing the show that night. And a 2-hour show, we would rehearse 2 weeks, 10 days, and have 4 days on camera, including the air day. There was a lot, as you can see, to assimilate on camera, which is why the AD job, especially at CBS, was so important. Because, well, even on You Are There, I would hit on the fall of the Alamo, at the moment that the Alamo fell in Studio 42, I would have something like, I might have 40 cuts in a minute, 40 camera cuts in a minute. And slowly, also on the bigger shows, it expanded to the use of more cameras. I think maybe the show that I'm most pleased with that I ever did, even though we did it on tape, it was recorded on tape, we actually did it with live technique, was when we did Iceman Cometh for Channel 13 for PBS. And that was a 4-hour show.
Right. It was NET. PBS, I don't think was in existence yet.
It was NET then? Was it
I
called?
believe so.
WNET?
Yeah.
At any rate, it was public television station. I mean,
Right.
no commercials or anything like that. But there was a 4-hour show, and we did each act in complete live technique. And I used 6 cameras for that show.
How would you describe your way of working with actors, your approach to directing, and were there particular, let's say, problems dealing with method versus non-method actors? Did one type or another work better for you?
For me at least, the approach to all three, whether it's theater, TV, or movies, is much the same. You're starting always with the same basic thing, which is thematically, what's it about? Not in plot terms, but thematically, what is it about? Iceman Cometh, it's tough to limit a great play to just one theme because there are usually many themes in them. But if Iceman Cometh is about any one thing, it's about the necessity for illusion in one's life. And at the beginning of work, when you start something, everything is possible. Your choices are infinite. My job is to start cutting the choices down so that every selection that we make is contributing to the dramatization of what is this piece about, to the exploration, to the illumination of that theme. And it affects every area of production. It affects the casting. It affects the work I do with the actors. It affects scenic life of it, the visual life of it from a lighting point of view, camera movement, editing, sound, everything. My job is to literally direct everything into one channel so that we define that piece to the best of our abilities.
And
in that, I don't prefer any particular kind of technique. When I did Long Day's Journey into Night, I had 4 actors, a total different technique. Ralph Richardson, classic English theater actor. Kate Hepburn, classic movie actor. Jason Robards, classic stage actor. And Dean, who's Stanislavski. Like, my job is to be whatever they need me to be. I'm no believer in any one particular kind of technique. I'll work any way they want to work.
why do you think that you developed a reputation of being an actor's director and so many actors enjoyed working with you?
I think because I was an actor myself, I know what they're going through. The process of acting is extremely painful. I know that doesn't sound logical to most people, but all good work is self-revelation. And that's true for performing artists as well. And actors, the only instrument they've got, it's not a violin, it's not a piano, It's not just their bodies the way a dancer is. There's no disguise. That's them up there. And the better they are, the more of themselves they're using. That process of self-revelation is extremely painful. I understand that process. If I can help them to feel any more secure and any more unafraid of releasing whatever part of themselves they have to, I understand that I can help them that way. And they feel that. I don't even have to articulate it. They sense it.
Especially in your television work, were there any actors in particular where there was a strong bond, or where you were able to make them feel comfortable and do some of their best work?
It happened all the time. And you would always repeat with those people, whether it was Newman or Warden or Kim Stanley. Oh, God, every time I worked with Kim, I was so thrilled. She brought out the best in me. The talent was so enormous. Again, these themes keep recurring. We spoke so many hours ago about quantity and what it meant. And one of the joys of that period, and it's one of the joys that English actors have, because of the repertory system in England, of repeating work with the same people over and over again. So you develop a shorthand. You don't have to define anything. Bang, you're into the heart of the work the first day. You don't have to break anything down on the way to it. It happened constantly.
Would you say that quality, was that something that you missed in the latter part of your career when you were no longer working in television, the sort of repertory quality of the people that you worked with?
No, I didn't miss it because, funnily enough, you can develop it with the crew. Since you very often work with the same cameraman all the time, a lot of the time, same sound man. And there are many times that you do use the same actors. I've done 5 pictures with Connery. I did 5 pictures with James Mason, 4 pictures with Fonda. You hit those relationships and you try to repeat them because Marty Scorsese and De Niro have had a wonderfully fruitful time together, and I'm sure it's mutually thrilling for them.
All right, let me ask you some questions specifically about Studio One and Kraft Television Theater. Studio One, anything you want to say about working for that series in particular? You spoke briefly about Herbert Brodkin before. Anything that stands out in your work for Studio One? Were these programs interchangeable, or did each have its own special character?
Studio One had a kind of formal rigidity. It seemed, I guess because it was the first successful dramatic anthology show. It was like Theater Guild of the Air used to in radio days have this, or Lux Radio Playhouse had these special. Studio Aura had a little bit of that. Studio One had a little bit of that quality, maybe because of Worthington Minor, who was the exec producer on it. So that I remember I did a 2-part show for them that it was a terrific show. It was called No Deadly Medicine with Lee Cobb.
Well, I was going to ask you about that.
And it was a beauty. And Lee was just brilliant. It was the first time we ever worked together. Oh, wait a minute. Was it after 12 Angry Men? Do you know the year of it?
I believe, was it 1957?
Yeah, I think it came after 12 Angry Men.
Yes.
And because I remember little tensions with Lee when we were shooting 12 Angry Men, which did not exist when we were doing No Deadly Medicine. It was one of the few. I was used to research because You Are There, particularly because of the political situation. Boy, we couldn't kid around. When we were doing Galileo's recantation, we couldn't put any modern slant on it. It had to be the truth. Otherwise, we would have had our heads handed to us. But this, so I was used to a lot of research coming to me from the CBS research department. Lovely, interesting parenthesis here. Somebody in the research department turned up, and I'm not nearly educated enough to know whether this is so, the possibility that Brutus was an illegitimate son of Caesar, which would have been marvelous if Shakespeare had ever known it. But on No Deadly Medicine, I went to do research really for the first time. And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it written by Arthur Haley? You have the author?
Yeah, I don't no.
Check it out. I'm almost sure it was written by Arthur Haley. I don't mean, I mean the Arthur Haley who wrote then about Hotel and about the Cars and popular novelists. Mm-hmm. I'm not thinking of Alex Haley,
right,
who wrote Roots. And so I think it was because of that I went down to the University of Pennsylvania to the pathology department, where I watched my first dissection, promptly fainted. Watched my first operation, promptly fainted. All I did was faint and vomit for the entire 2 days. But I remember liking the show very much.
Now, No Deadly Medicine was the last Studio One teleplay to originate in New York. Why did this series and so many of the others sort of migrate to Hollywood?
Space. We never had adequate studio space here. The largest stage we ever had, I remember when I was doing Omnibus, they were using Channel 5, had on East 67th Street, a studio that was, I don't know, it was a decent-sized studio. It might have been 80 by 100. NBC had a terrific studio out in Brooklyn at Avenue N, where I did Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates with Tab Hunter.
Avenue M and where, do you know? I'm a Brooklynite.
Right, somewhere between Ocean Parkway and Eastern Parkway.
Mm-hmm.
And that I did with Tab Hunter and Pretty Perky Peggy King. And that was a terrific studio. But that was the only adequate studio. And for the rest of it, CBS was using a place right here at 54th and 9th Avenue. Hollywood, the reason it went out there was because CBS built their place and NBC built their place. It's the same thing that has held up film production here all these years. No interior space.
Now, did this move somehow have an impact on the content of the teleplays and moving away from the culture of New York, the theatrical world of New York?
I don't know. One could say that. I mean, certainly, I didn't see that many of them, but certainly people felt terrific about Playhouse 90, treated very respectfully. I was offered Playhouse 90, but I didn't want to move to California. And John Frankenheimer was my AD, so I said, take John. He's going to be a wonderful director. And I like that continuity of my moving up to Yule and John moving up to me, and it was nice, you know. So I don't know. I think Where it may have had some difference was that it's possible, and I can't swear to this, that the level of acting fell a little bit because the series hadn't really begun, and New York actors were still, in those days, quite different from West Coast actors. But as you know, by now there's no difference at all, and there hasn't been any for a good 15, 20 years.
Let me move to craft television theater. David Susskind was executive producer. Robert Herridge was the producer. What can you tell us about working with them and craft television theater and your work for them?
I don't remember. I didn't work for Herridge. I had tremendous respect for him. I thought he did terrific work. He directed as well, didn't he? Bob Herridge. I think he did, and did some very innovative things. David was a tumler. That's a Jewish word that means a guy who makes a lot of noise. He was busy. He had 12 shows going, and he had wonderful people working with him. So from that point of view, he must have been good to work for, because he had this terrific producer, Audrey Maas, who married Peter, and Jackie Babin was a terrific producer. He had terrific people working for him. David would come in and make noise the first day of rehearsal and meet the stars, and then come around on camera day and give you notes and create a little chaos at dress rehearsal.
Now, you did 3 short plays by Tennessee Williams in 1958 for Kraft.
Who did I do that for?
For Kraft.
And David, I think that was David produced that. I think he might have.
I would imagine so. The 3 plays: Mooney's Kid Don't Cry, The Last of My Solid Watches.
Gold watches, right.
And The Property is Condemned.
This Property is Condemned.
Yeah. Was Tennessee Williams himself involved at all?
No, because not a word had to be changed. I mean, we just did the play's text. So I never met him. I met him subsequently when I did a movie of his, but I know from that he did see them and was very impressed by them, which is one of the reasons I got the movie I did.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to say about those particular plays? I guess Lee Grant was in The Property is Condemned.
No, This Property Condemned was done by a young girl named Zena Bethune. Lee was in Mooney's Kid Don't Cry. And I've forgotten who played opposite her. She was extraordinary. And a brilliant character actor by the name of Thomas Chalmers was in the one about the salesman. What was the other title? The third title?
The Property is Condemned?
No.
The Last of My Solid Watches.
The Last of My Solid Gold Watches. It's interesting how many of our major playwrights have written plays about salesmen. It's about a salesman on the road whose heart is giving out on him. And I had acted with Thomas Chalmers when I was 13, the play that Max Reinhardt directed. I just remember loving doing those plays.
Now, All the King's Men was also a Kraft.
Yeah, that was a good show. That was also 2 parts. All right.
And what, Maureen Stapleton and Neville Brand were in it.
Right.
Were there any particular problems or challenges of adapting a novel or play?
I don't remember who did the adaptation. Do you have it listed there?
I don't.
That this much I remember about it. The show received rave reviews, and one of them, a very esoteric critic, I've forgotten his name, but one of those critics who scratches like this, he wrote this review of me. I was the second coming, all about how in the part 1, when Willie is running for governor, I had staged it so that the audience was always up in the balcony, and he was always down here, and the audience was always up there, and he was always looking up to the people, and their faces were looking down at him. And in part two, when he was this monster, he was always above them, and they were below. Not only below him, they were covered with umbrellas, so that you couldn't even see the faces anymore. What had happened was very simple. I had used up the extras budget on the first show. So when I got to the second show, I had to figure how to make the place look jammed. So I did the big crowd scenes in what looked like rain, and everybody carried an umbrella, so they spread out 3 times as far. And that was the whole reason.
Okay. Here's a good place to stop. The Sacco and Vanzetti story was a 2-part television movie that you did in 1960. How did that production come about?
It was Reggie Rose's idea. Reggie did the script, and Robert Allen Arthur was the producer. I think we did it for NBC, didn't we?
Right.
Again, what a show. Marty Balsam and Steve Hill. Marty played Sacco, Steve Hill played Vanzetti. And 2-parter, right? Yeah.
Right.
And if I'm not, I know, oh yes. I know it was on tape, so tape must have come in by then. The reason I know it was on tape is because by then I had done some movies, and I was used to pictures being changed on you by the management. This was hardly a subject matter that one could have great reliance on as far as either the network or I don't even remember who the sponsor was. And so I remember Steve did the great Vanzetti address to the judge, that you get in every lit class in college. And he was just brilliant. It was just underplayed and so simple and so direct. And Bob said, and Reggie, they both wanted it more feisty and more angry. And I said, no, his speech is so great, simpler, better. Would you try it? Just try it the other way. I said, I'm not going to try it the other way, because then when we edit it, once I've left, you'll have the editor put the way you want it in there. So, no, I'm not going to do it another way. And Bob Arthur, one of the sweetest men that ever lived, and sensitive writer, wonderful man, said, look. And he took the back page of my script and said, he was the producer, Sidney Lumet has final cut on this show. Signed, Robert Allen Arthur, producer. Wouldn't have been worth anything, but that did it. And I did it the other way. And when it was over, Bob and Reggie said, no, you were right. But it was the first time I'd ever gotten into this discussion about final cut, which then became a big thing in my own movie career.
Which certainly was not an issue when it came to live television.
No.
Tell me sort of briefly what your feeling was about the arrival of videotape and its impact on your work on TV.
Mixed blessing. There were wonderful things about it. I remember the Parks Department had restored Harper's Ferry to just what it looked like when John Brown went down there. And so we did an NBC show. I'm trying to remember who wrote it. I can't remember. But James Mason played John Brown. I remember Ossie Davis was in it. And it was my first location experience with videotape. We all went down there, cast, crew, the works, rehearsed down there for 4 days, and then shot it. And I was so thrilled with the result visually that from then on in, I began to think of using videotape as a way of doing movies. And sure enough, now it's finally going to happen, isn't it? Except, I mean, it'll be on discs, it'll be digital. But it should have happened a long time ago. It's far superior to film. And
But you say mixed feelings. Is there a downside?
the downside was that because we never had the budgets to really take the time that you've got in movies. The big advantage about movies was money. You could take as much time as needed, do it to perfection. In TV, we never could do that. We never had the money. So you couldn't get the perfection that you could in a movie, and you were also destroying the thrill of the live performance, because that cannot be overestimated how exciting it was to go straight through the piece from beginning to end.
In 1961, Playhouse 90 was canceled, and which I guess many people consider marking the end of this golden age of anthology drama on television. How do you explain its demise? How do you understand it?
To begin with, the best parts of so many things are at the beginning. Political movements at their most idealistic, before they become hopelessly corrupt. A lot of talents do their best work at the beginning. Here there was a very specific mechanism that took over. The reason live disappeared is very simple. It was economic. You could obviously do better financially on film because you could play it and play it and play it and play it. And tape didn't even have that advantage because in those days, the quality wasn't that. Well, I thought it was better, but they thought that film was better. Also, every television station in the United States and certainly Europe had a machine which could project film because they ran movies all the time. That was the big staple. In those days, the Ampex tape machine, which played tape, cost about $40,000. So your station in Erie, Pennsylvania, wasn't going to be able to afford a $40,000 Ampex tape player. But they already had in the original investment the machine that could handle film. So that's primarily why it went on to film. Once it went on to film, we were now starting to deal with big bucks. As soon as you start dealing with big bucks, the quality's going to sink because people are going to head for a greater common denominator. The common denominator is going to become more common. So that started
Become more
common.
More common.
So that started your situation, common comedies. It started, that whole.
What about, Eric Barnow, the broadcast historian, has suggested, others have argued that advertisers felt too that they could make more money over situation comedies, the kind of more superficial, feel-good qualities of those programs, whereas the more serious teleplays in the anthology series were just not vehicles for consumerism, for selling products, for suggesting that by buying product X and Y you'll become happy when you're dealing with.
Right.
We dealt with issues that were really.
I don't know that that's true. It could very well be true, but even today, what are the successful shows? ER, NYPD Blue. No, sure there were the others, but the new shows this season, West Wing, Third Watch. Those are the shows that are taking off a little, and they're not they're not the Nanny, although that's a funny show. But I don't know if it's true. I'm just not well versed enough.
Yeah. How did the change affect your career?
Well, I was lucky. I was then pretty well off into movies. By 1960, 61, I think I'd probably already done 4 or 5 movies.
When was the last time you worked in television?
I can't. Oh, the last time I worked in television was when we were doing network, and I went up to Canada because they had a terrific facility that one could rent, and did the Howard Beale show live. I mean, I was recording it on film, but at the same time, I had monitors in the control room and so on and so forth, and was actually directing it live to get what I wanted on the monitors.
Right. Speaking of network, that is of your long string of major films, the one that addressed, in a sense, the history of the development of television. The screenwriter was Paddy Chayefsky, who, of course, dates back to the earlier period. How did this project come about? And
Paddy came to me 2 years before he did it, and as I told you, I had done what I think was his first television show, a half-hour show. I remember Joseph Anthony played the lead, and it was an adaptation of a Nelson Algren short story that Paddy wrote about this sort of psychotic, it was on Danger, police captain. And Paddy came to me and said, Sidney, I'm going to do a piece on television, and I think it'll be right up your alley. And I said, Paddy, terrific. 2 years later, a script arrived. Literally that simple. And, how could you not fall in love?
was the character of Howard Beale based on an actual person?
No. You see, it's a peculiar movie. Everybody keeps saying, oh, God, what a brilliant satire. And Paddy and I, we keep saying, what's satire? It's sheer reportage. Everything that was discussed about television in that movie has happened, except we haven't killed anybody on the air yet. That's the only thing that hasn't happened, deliberately. But other than that, everything has happened. News as entertainment. I mean, could anything be sillier than the way poor Dan Rather has to stand up there on 48 Hours or whatever that silly show is and try to make believe that he's a magazine editor or what have you and be serious about this nonsense that they put on night after night? And there, it may have been a little much to have the prognosticator who came around on a revolving stage to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. But I don't think it's too far-fetched.
How was the film received, especially by the industry?
Loved it. Nobody would have dared dislike it, because then people would say, oh, then it's about you. If you don't like it, it's because they were making fun of you. So everybody was saying, no, it's about CBS. No, it's about the NBC people. NBC was saying, no, it's about the ABC people. And of course, everybody were just composites of people that Paddy knew.
So
the William Holden character was slightly, I don't know that it was based on John Chancellor, but John Chancellor was a very close friend of Paddy's.
And so, in general, summarizing, when you watch TV today or in recent years, is there much in the way of drama that you find that you like on television, whether commercial, non-commercial?
I think the level of acting is very high. I think it's really quite extraordinary what they do, especially on the Hour series where they don't really have rehearsal time. And The thing that I worry about increasingly, they worry about the violence of television, and they worry about the sex, and I don't think those are the problems. I don't think the violence is caused by seeing bang, 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 bang. I think the increasing and the alienation, the loss of people going to the polls, all of those things, I think it's obviously clearly a complicated question. But the area of television's responsibility in that I don't think anybody has addressed is the very nature of the medium itself. It's an isolating experience. You are alone. And it is the first time in human history where entertainment was given to you alone. The test of it is really the difference in the way you laugh. When you see a Marx Brother movie in a theater, as opposed to when you see a Marx Brother movie on the box. Now that isolation is, in my view, at the root of the alienation that supposedly everybody is feeling. I think that has to be investigated in terms of violence. I think that has to be investigated in terms of people not turning out to vote. Because we are not designed to be alone, and some very big violation is going on. I think it's one of the reasons, interesting, why sports stadiums keep growing bigger and bigger, and why sports attendance keeps going up and up. Because I think out of the nature of that box, people are so thirsty for a greater communal contact, even if it's in terms of cheering Knobloch's home run or a touchdown. I think that all of that is becoming more important because it's the only community we've got left. And I don't know, as I look back on a long period of time, this is enormously complicated what we're talking about. It is clear to me, for example, that television is responsible for the end of the Vietnam War. That when Walter Cronkite showed you footage of GIs cutting the ears off dead Viet Cong, Americans said to each other, wait a minute, that's not Americans doing that. And it was Americans doing that. That we never knew that we were capable of the same bestiality as other people. And I mean, the Vietnam experience was enormous. It is the first time, I think, in human history, a government was overthrown peaceably, essentially. Where a war, by that, not a government overthrown, but a war stopped without a revolution taking place, an armed revolution taking place. And that's a gigantic event. And television. So I'm not painting just a disastrous picture, but like everything else in life, everything that you find positive has its other side. And this increasing sense of isolation that I see happening among people, to the insanity that we watch of the afternoon shows, what's going on there that's obscene. And I don't consider those evening news magazines shows far different. I think they just don't have an audience going, woo, 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 woo. I think that's the only difference. I think their subject matter is the same. They use bigger words, but they're all still fundamentally doing the same thing, which is exploiting an emotional human condition. I mean, one of the reasons I think 60 Minutes has been so successful is it doesn't do that. So it's a mixed bag, but I'm not optimistic, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. What advice along those lines, what advice would you give to young people, someone starting out, aspiring to be a director or aspiring to be a writer, working in television?
Work wherever you can. It doesn't matter what. A documentary, a commercial, wherever you can get near a camera, wherever you can, especially if you're a director. You're not going to be a director until you put your eye into that finder. And it doesn't matter what. There's no such thing as good work or bad work. There's only work at the beginning. Until you've got enough under your belt technically and have your legs under you, until you've learned to walk, you need all of it. Learn those lenses. To hell with the zoom lens. It's not going to teach you anything. It's a bad lens. Visually doesn't help you tell anything. The zoom lens lies because it doesn't relate to the eye, you see. It doesn't do what the eye does. Because if you notice on a zoom lens, the background moves as well as the foreground. As well as me getting bigger, that's getting bigger behind me. That doesn't happen with your eye. So it's basically telling you a lie visually to begin with. That's why prime lenses are still, in my view, the heart of any visual medium.
Say a word about your career right now and what projects you're contemplating or involved in.
I don't want to do gigs anymore. I've done a lot of gigs. I think most directors do. Pictures for various reasons other than the subject matter and the emotional appeal and connection that you get with it. I've done a lot of pictures like that and done a lot of pictures not like that. Fundamentally, I just feel extremely lucky. I mean, you talk to anybody talented, and you find that who's gotten some work done, and you'll find that word luck comes in there endlessly. And just the sheer timing of being my age in 1949 when all this nonsense began.
Do you have any regrets? Was there ever a project you wanted to do but didn't?
Loads of projects I wanted to do but didn't. But no regrets. In some instances, I'm delighted. I had Kazantzakis' book, The Last Temptation of Christ, under option for 2 years. I was desperate to make a movie out of it. And then dropped the option finally, as you know. Marty made it, Scorsese made it. And when he ran into the anti-Semitism he ran into, can you imagine what would have happened if a Jew had done that movie?
Could you say what the highlight of your career you consider of your career, one in television and two in film, in terms of the work?
It's all of a piece to me. I'm not being coy. I'm not avoiding it. There's a continuum that's just so sensible to me. I like it. I like it all.
How would you like to be remembered?
Not my department. Not my department. Couldn't care less. I'm not going to be here, so what difference does it make? But leave that to the. I hope the only record of my work isn't going to be Pauline Kael. I hope people will look at the work, but.
And would you say that this is really my last question? Any particular theme or overarching concept that you feel links all your work?
I don't know. And again, I'm not being coy. I always, since I always say yes to a project instinctively, and then I look back over a period of time and I say, oh, that's what I was interested in then. I mean, when I did Daniel, Doctorow's book, The Book of Daniel. And then a couple of years later, I did Running on Empty. And then a couple of years after that, I did Family Business. And I realized that, first of all three pictures were about the same thing. They were all about parents and children. And they were all about the passion of the parent and the consequences of that passion on the child in simpler and simpler versions. The first one, which is a really fine picture, but was very difficult for people to relate to and understand. The second one, a little more simplified, a little more sentimental. And the third one, an actual comedy, in this attempt to get somebody relating to. But I didn't know till after, years later, I said, oh my God, those three pictures are completely connected. I never knew it at the time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.